I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, that the next administration will inherit one of the most challenging foreign policy situations in the Middle East in decades, certainly in my lifetime, and that's a very long time. The region is in violent transition. Civil wars in Syria and Libya and Yemen have really pushed these states into the situation of being failed states. Lebanon and Iraq are certainly extremely fragile. Iran's regional ambitions have aggravated underlying Sunni-Shia tensions. All of this forms the context for the rise of non-state terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And this Middle East instability has threatened some of the United States' most important allies. The refugee flow and the immigration flow caused by instability in the Middle East has undermined EU security and unity. It's created space for Russian adventurism, and these are some of the issues that will be tackled in the annals.
The section I helped put together is a number of very interesting chapters that I would encourage you to read online. One by Mark Lynch on failed states and ungoverned spaces, one by Charles Lister on the competition between ISIS and Al-Qaeda and what dynamic that brings about, one by the Princeton professor Bernard Heikel on the thinking and ideology of groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, chapter by General John Allen on thinking long-term about grand strategy in facing and defeating extremism on the long term, and my own chapter on the importance of building or rebuilding regional order. In our section, we try to look at the intersection between events in the Middle East and U.S. interests and U.S. policy. Hello, I'm Paul Salem. I'm the Vice President for Policy of Research at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. We're following very closely the presidential election and doing a lot of work on what policies should be Middle East policies for the next president. Secretary Clinton, if she becomes president, is likely to continue many of the policies of the Obama administration, but to be a bit more tough and perhaps to use force more readily than President Obama did. This will mean she will continue the nuclear deal with Iran. She will continue support for Iraq and the Kurds in northern Iraq as well. In Syria, she might likely do more than President Obama did, which might involve imposing a no-fly zone and creating safe zones and putting pressure on the Assad regime. Candidate Trump would bring about very different U.S. policies in the Middle East. The details of these policies really are unknown at this point because he has not provided any detailed plans. But definitely, candidate Trump feels very warmly about President Putin and Russia. In the Middle East, he is likely to more take the side of President Trump. That would mean in Syria, he might be more favorable towards the Assad regime and less favorable towards the opposition, and that could have a great impact in Syria. In Iraq, however, I think he would likely continue the policies of the current administration. Since Secretary Clinton is most likely to be the president, that would be the more relevant set of issues.
We're still focused on Al-Qaeda as the primary enemy and the various hotspots, but as Syria dissolved and as Iraq... My name is Rand Beers, and I am currently an adjunct professor at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. With respect to the administration's approach to Kurdistan, the next administration's approach to Kurdistan, I think that there's no question that the Kurds have to be part of the solution to any of the conflicts either in Iraq or Syria. And I think that what you can expect is a serious policy study on the part of an incoming administration to figure out how that fits together with all of the other regional actors that we've talked about, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, the Jordanians, Lebanon. All of them are part of this very, very complex issue, which is then overlaid with the conflict between Sunni and Shia in the region. So I think that Kurds will be part of the solution, and it's going to take some very serious navigating to find what direction that actually is.
In Washington, both the experiment of the KRG in northern Iraq has been a very positive one in general, fairly democratic, fairly secular, and the Peshmerga have done a tremendous job in protecting their own areas against ISIS, but also in this current campaign to help liberate Mosul. The issue of independence for the Kurds, the U.S., I think the U.S. sees this challenge as if there were a pathway for the Kurds to have actual independence without getting into trouble with Baghdad, Ankara, and Tehran, and probably Damascus, they would be okay with it, but they don't see such a pathway, so they advise not proceeding to trying to declare independence in northern Iraq. In Syria, it's obvious that the Kurdish fighters there are a main ally of the U.S. And whether they end up with a sort of autonomous federal zone like in northern Iraq or not, I think the U.S. would be favorable to both options, but they correctly recognize that's something that the Syrian Kurds have to work out with the Syrian opposition and maybe with the Syrian government if and when there is a negotiation. In terms of arming in the Iraqi side, they've largely insisted in order to maintain Baghdad's influence in Iraq's unity that that the U.S. not do so much directly with Erbil, but to maintain things through Baghdad to maintain some national unity. As we've mentioned in northern Syria, the U.S. in general hasn't been very proactive in arming and so on, but they certainly have been supportive of the fighting forces there. And I think when the operation to Raqqa gains steam sometime, whether it's at the end of this administration or the beginning of the next, U.S. assets will be used more intensively there as well. On Iran and Al-Qaeda, I think it's not just Iran, it's Iran and the Assad regime. Yes, it's clear that Iran and the Assad regime, particularly when the U.S. invaded Iraq, the Iranian position was, thank you for invading Iraq and removing the Saddam regime, and we'd like you to leave soon. So we're going to help any insurgency which will make you uncomfortable, make sure that you don't stay like you stayed in South Korea or Germany or other places. And they succeeded in that, and the U.S. indeed had left. We have now more people back there now. So yeah, they very consciously used assets in Iraq and making sure the U.S. took the decision not to remain in any major way. And the Assad regime, and I guide you to our colleague Charles Lister's book on the Syrian jihad, the Assad regime has had long links with Al-Qaeda and radicals. They've used them in Lebanon. They used them to destabilize U.S.-occupied or U.S.-run Iraq, and the Maliki government wanted to take Assad to The Hague because of that. And they certainly used them to seed the opposition and to sort of poison the opposition and to make sure that there was a major radical terrorist aspect in the opposition. They still don't really attack ISIS. They've only attacked them in Palmyra. Otherwise, their attacks are all on non-ISIS areas and rebel-held areas. Sadly, Iran and Russia have gone along with that. But that's not to say that the main support of ISIS and Al-Qaeda comes from probably radicalized communities or people who support them from the Muslim world beyond the Arab world, or even from the Arab world in the Sunni world. So yes, Iran and Assad regime have played a role, but so have many other networks.
So thanks to all of you. Thanks so much for the volume and for this panel, and have a great day.